In this last video, in this lecture 17 series, we will look at C functions. We'll take a closing look at C functions. So remember that a function definition or prototype / interface has parameters, and when we look at the declaration or a definition of a function, the parameters that we see are called formal parameters. That is, that's what we call them inside the function. So if you see the word formal parameter, that just means what names do we give whatever is passed in inside this function, because there is a different name, chances are, when you look in the calling function. So in the calling function, what they really are in this case Z and F. Those are called actual parameters. So assuming that you have two variables named Z and F, those are the actual things. They are passed in, and inside this function they're called dummy variables. These are the names inside function for these two parameters. So once again, these are formal parameters, and what you pass in are called arguments, although most people use these terms arguments and parameters interchangeably, and actually I did too right here. This should be actual arguments. Technically, when you call a function, you call it with arguments, and when you look inside a function, the function has parameters. So once again, functions see parameters passed in, whereas you call a function with arguments. And this is true also in Java and C++. When you call a method, you're passing arguments to a method. In the method, what you have are parameters, and those are formal parameters. Okay. One very last topic that I want to look at is passed by value versus passed by reference. So in functions in C, they're actually, technically speaking, C only has pass by value, just like in Java and C++. But there is a way of passing parameters that is called pass by reference. And technically speaking, C does not have pass by reference. That's something that only C++ has of these three languages. But we will call this, a lot of C programmers call this pass by reference, even though technically it's not. So what's the idea here? So the idea is something that we saw in scanf. Remember that scanf takes as argument a format string and then any number of pointers. And why does it do that? So that scanf can take those pointers and change the things that the pointers are pointing to. That's a way of essentially returning multiple values. In addition to returning the return value, you can think of a function that takes as one of the arguments a pointer, can technically sort of return something else in whatever y points to in this case. Okay, so this should actually, I just saw that this should be something like star y. Sorry about that. That's a mistake. And so you should set star y equal to 10.5. Okay, so let me just repeat. Almost all variables, if you see a function and you have a parameter called int x, that's passed by value. You're passing in the value for x. And when you return, even if you change x in here inside this function, if you change x, that change is not reflected when you return. So if, for example, you set int z is equal to 0, you call this function with z, and inside this function you change x to 5, when you return, z will still be 0. And you can try that out. That's how pass by value works. Now, if you pass, instead of just a double or int, you pass double star or int star, what you're passing is a pointer. And so when you call this function, you need a pointer. So if you have a double f, you can't just pass f to it because f is double. This function is expecting a pointer to double, and so what you need to do is say ampersand f, for example. Okay, so you pass in a pointer to f as a parameter, and let's say somewhere in here this should be a star y, and you say star y equals 10.5. What this is doing is changing the thing that y points to, and y is a pointer, right? So y is a pointer to a double. So now you've changed f because you passed a pointer to f. So this is a big difference. Technically speaking, this is actually still pass by values, because what you're doing is you're passing in a pointer, you're passing in the value of a pointer, and you're taking the value of the pointer, and then internally in this function you're changing the thing that the pointer points to. So technically speaking, this is actually pass by value, but a lot of people refer to this as pass by reference, even though it's not. And that's, you just have to deal with that, I guess. So you're passing in address of an object inside the calling function. And so by doing that, we're allowing this function to potentially change the thing that this address points to. In this case, that's f. So once again, let me point out there is a typo. This should be star y. Star y equals 10.5. And if you do that, yes, this works like pass by reference, and we can call it that. It's no big deal. Okay, so that's the end of this set of lectures. If you get a chance, try out these programs, and you will need, when you do that, you will see that you will need a star y here.